presentation.
I thought it came off well, but then in that state, you don't remember what you said anyway.
You see, Ray is one of those speakers who, when he's absolutely sober, is a knockout. So not so sober. It must be just amazing. We're just waiting for the water so that we're not interrupted, and then we'll start. It's one of the details that slips by when you're organizing something like this. I will say, for those of you who came in late, that I have a sort of syllabus of the day's activities here. Does anybody not have this now that's in the room? Thank you. Anyone else?
Here?
And that have you signed up? Okay, are you registered in the answer? You just need to fill that in if you'd like to take the course for a half unit. This is for today, the afternoon. Today, the afternoon. Okay, well then just feel free to join us as you can. I think they've forgotten our water.
Well, why don't we start?
Why don't we start anyway and then let the water appear at some time. I'd like to again introduce myself to those of you who are just a few minutes late. I am Yvonne Jacobson, and I am the instructor, the moderator at the panel for this morning and this afternoon. I myself come from a family farm, and what we hope to do here is to discuss the experience of the family farm system in the Santa Clara Valley. First of all, there is the question of the land, and then there is the question of the people, and then there is the question of time, which moves over both. In this case, the land is the Santa Clara Valley itself. The people are the many people who came here after the gold rush, who settled on the land, and who established a system of the family farms. And of course, the time is the history of this settlement, the history of an institution here in the valley. I have gathered together representatives of family farms, and in a sense, they all speak to the experience of the settlement of America. Our own valley is a microcosm of that settlement. I've chosen these people because they represent a cross-section of the experience. We have different types of farms represented. We have orchardists, we have flower grower, we have people who represent the fresh fruit industry and the dried fruit industry. Now, there are many more types of farms in the Santa Clara Valley, but for purposes of discussion, I've limited it to those here. Another reason for selecting these individuals is that they all have a history in our valley of 3 or more generations. In one case, we have a family that represents 100 years of settlement on the same piece of land. Another reason that these people have been chosen is that they represent a varied ethnic background, somehow a true slice of Americana. There are 7 of us here, and I believe we represent at least 8 different nationalities. We represent the Anglo-Saxon side of our settlement in America. We represent Italian and French, Yugoslavian, Swedish. We even represent the Middle Eastern part of the world, and of course we represent Asia, a true melting pot of the American experience. And then the last reason that these individuals have been chosen is that we have all participated in legend. For the Santa Clara Valley enters into that category of legend and myth. It was a wonderful valley, a valley of heart's delight. We've been called the largest orchard in the world. At one time, 100,000 acres of land in orchard crops. Today, in our county, there are less than 12,000. So, without further ado, I will begin by allowing each of the speakers to present a little background of their families. Oh, would you like to do it?
Just roll it?
No, I think there's a button. I don't even know where it is. Go ahead. Before I begin with the speakers, I'll just give you a very thumbnail sketch of my own family. On one side, there were Swedish immigrants who came to the Santa Clara County in the 1880s and established a 5-acre farm in Sunnyvale. About 1915 or so, my grandfather decided that Sunnyvale was getting overpopulated, and so he moved out of town to the edge of town, which was in the El Camino Real. And the family farm has been there ever since. The settlers, of course, on the farm were not only the men who undertook to make that arduous journey across the seas and overland over the United States, but there were also women. My mother, at the age of 17, boarded a cattle ship in the port city of Beirut in Lebanon, and to say goodbye to her parents and never see them again. At 17, she was detoured in France. She couldn't enter the United States, and so she lived in Mexico for 7 years and then entered the U.S. finally under an assumed name and an illegal. She was the early wetback. She met my father in Sunnyvale and within a very short time became his wife and worked alongside him in the farming enterprise, so that the family farm really was a conjunction of male, female, children, the whole family experience, and we'll hear about more of this. My father's presence in the county as a farmer was very deep. He was very committed. I asked him at one point, why didn't he sell his land and leave? Why didn't he go, as many farmers did, to the northern part of the state or some other part of the state? He said, I have some of the best land in the world, why should I move? He said to me that I'm doing exactly what I want to do, why should I change? He was determined to stay on the land, and now that my father has passed away, my brother continues as a family farmer right in the heart of Sunnyvale, an oasis there. Now, for our first participant, I would like to introduce to you Bob and Audrey Butcher, whose family has been in Santa Clara County also since the 1880s. And in fact, they're celebrating 100 years of presence in Santa Clara of the family farm. And I will let Bob begin, and then Audrey, after Bob is finished, you can start.
Okay. Pardon me, I'm Bob Butcher, and I'm the third generation, third generation in this valley, same spot that my grandfather came to in 1881. Actually, I'm the 7th generation in the United States, following down to this valley. I might give you a little sketch of my grandfather. Now I'm talking at this time only on my father's side of the family, because they were the ones that settled the land. He was born, my grandfather was born in 1825 in Parkersburg, Virginia, which is now West Virginia, and worked on his father's farm for many years. And I guess later on he became a school teacher there and did various jobs, and nothing seemed to satisfy him. He hadn't had, I suppose you'd call it a dream yet, of what he really wanted, money more than anything else, I suppose, because his granddaughter wrote this little sketch. I might read it, it won't take too long, of my grandfather's decision to come to California. He was a school teacher, and there were very short terms in those days, so he rented Buckman's Mill at Elizabeth, West Virginia, at that time Virginia. He had Gilbert McCune take care of it while he was teaching. Now, my grandfather, which I just learned 2 years ago, was married before he married my grandmother in my end of the family.
Peyton Place.
Yeah. This was a sawmill and flour mill combined, and in that day, the largest mill in the vicinity. Now, this is interesting here. The summer of 1857 was a very dry one, and there was scarcely enough water to operate the mill. He could not make enough money for the rent. In the latter part of the summer, there was high water and lots of timber, and rafts was run down the Kanawha River. One day, Rolla, there are 3 Rolla Butchers in the family. This Rolla, my grandfather, and his son, and then his son. One day Rollo was at the mill watching the river. He came to the house and told Grandma, that would be his wife, he had a chance to get a job in a fleet of timber to Cincinnati. As they were in debt, he thought he should take the job. She asked him how long it would take. He said, about 3 weeks. He kissed her goodbye, and that was the last she saw of him for 13 years. He had headed west. He did go to Cincinnati and got the Wanderlust. And where is it here? When he got to Cincinnati, he wrote her a letter and sent her $15. He said he had bought a cheap suit of clothes and had $5 left and was starting for California. That's the first that I, in any of my research, have found where he was starting to come to this coast. So he did come to California about 1857, 1858, and came all the way out to Magalia, that's near Paradise, Chico, up there, and went into the gold mines. And at a little later date, another thing that happened, he was married now out in California. Now, whether that was by divorce of his first wife, we don't know. Benefit of divorce, because there's nothing in the record saying that he had divorced. But he did write to her later, and I thought that was kind of nice. I won't take too much time. I have to get on to a more recent date. So he was married in California, up near Marysville, and had 2 children. Then, for some reason, he went back to Montana. And I should also have mentioned that he was in Montana first and Utah, and he studied to become a mining engineer and became a rather well-known engineer. He founded the Alice mine in Butte, Montana, and too bad he didn't spend more time there, hold on to it, because later it became Anaconda and was listed on the New York Exchange for $10 million. But he sold that for, he didn't have enough foresight. He sold that for $18,000 and came west with my father. Now, you spoke of, Yvonne, of 100 years. They came in 1881. His health was failing, and he sold any interest he had in various mines, copper and silver mines, and headed west with his wife, his new wife, and 3 children, of which my father was the youngest, I believe. And the two of the children, the oldest, were born in California, and my father was born in Deer Lodge, Montana. So my grandfather came to California at the age of 55 when he arrived here, and my father was 9 years old, and I was 0 years old because I was born in 1913, some later date. So anyway, they looked all over California, from what my father told me, for a ranch, because he thought that would improve his health. I think they went down south, up north, and they finally ended up where I am now at the corner of Wolf, Fremont, and El Camino. And they purchased in 1881 160 acres, which is a quarter section. And that cost him the $18,000 that he got for his mining interest. So it came out even, which amounts to $112 an acre, which is, I wish I could say that now. But so I don't know whether he really realized the American dream. They got there in 1881 in August, and he passed away 6 months later in February of 1882. And so it was his children's children that really realized the benefit of owning such a good orchard land. And anyway, by 1888, my grandmother had sold all but 64 acres. And you might be interested in what she was growing in 1888. I'd say a third of it was prunes, 2 or 3 kinds of prunes. Another third of it was peaches, and then apples would be the 4th largest, and then a variety of plums and strawberries and other things. So even in 1888, there were many orchards in the valley. Some people believe that it was just grain land, but she had a going concern there, a business. So gradually, as my father got older and his brother, they helped out on the ranch. And at that time, now we only had 64 acres or so. But the gold rush in Alaska got to him in 1898, so he went up to Alaska in the gold, mining for gold, but he said it was a poor thing to get into because all the gold, from his point of view, had been taken out, so he ran a restaurant and made probably more money than if he had mined for gold. So he came back after a year or so at Stanford and helped run the ranch. And so that's up to my time, I guess. My father, I worked at Bethlehem Steel for 10 years behind a desk, which I didn't like, so I was very happy to go into partnership with my father in 1950. I'm really a newcomer at ranching, but I learned a lot in a hurry. But there are two things my father, you might ask what he passed on to my brother. I have an older brother myself. One is quality. He was never would like to want to sell anything that wasn't the very best. I remember him down at our ranch day after day picking out some of the, by the way, we had well, that's another point, but he wanted #1 fruit to go to the market, and we sold plums, 600 or 800 boxes a day down to the Los Angeles market, and then they went east, and we had and his other thing, I guess all you ranchers know that, is that if you put all your eggs in prunes, for instance, and the prune market goes bad, which it did during the Depression days and even later, well, you're stuck. So we had a variety of fruit, prunes, lots of pears, plums, apricots, and cherries, at least 5. And in those categories, there were categories within those fruits. In other words, we had 4 or 5 types of plums in case one didn't sell while the other would. So we came through the Depression days pretty well because of that. And I don't want to take too much time here.
Well, thank you, Bob. I'd like to just make a couple of observations on everything that you've said. The mobility of America, which we tend to think is a modern experience, is very old. And you can just in the recounting of the journey of his grandfather and even his father going to Alaska, seems to impress upon us that we have been a mobile nation from a very early period. In the whole concept, we were not rooted to one place. And I think that in every story here, you're going to find that is true. The willingness, the kind of energy it takes to get up, pull up your roots from one place and go to another, and if necessary, crisscross back and forth. And of course, I can vouch for the quality of the butcher produce. For many years, my mother, who runs a fruit stand in Sunnyvale, has bought Bob's plums and sold them there, and the quality is exceptional. I'd like now to introduce Audrey Butcher. Audrey's family also has a very long history in the valley, and I have purposely invited women to this panel to emphasize that farming was not simply a male preserve, that the women had a lot to do with it. And Audrey, please tell us something about your family.
My family were also movers, starting the first 2 families in this valley arrived in 1873 and voted in 1874. Of course, it was just the men who could vote in 1874. The Hobson family, the first members of the Hobson family that came earlier, during gold rush times and before. George Hobson came from North Carolina in 1846 and found that there wasn't much in Santa Clara County except a few mud huts, so he went to Monterey. But I don't think that Monterey interested him too much, so he came back and was in Santa Clara County for the rest of his life. He was a cousin of my grandmother Hobson, Kiesling. Then 2 sons of Stephen Hobson, Stephen Jr. and David Hobson, came in 1850, and they mined for gold, and with the money that they made in the mines, bought land. And David bought land in Berryessa, and he was an orchardist, most of the things that are listed that he grew were tree fruits. And he was one of the founders of the Quaker Church in San Jose. Then, after the Civil War, Stephen Hobson was able to leave, and first was in Indiana, and then in 1870, and then came in 1873 and bought land near his son in Berryessa. The Kiesling family came to this country, the first brothers, in 1750 in Philadelphia. And my grandfather used to say he was a Dutchman. And I thought, well, you know, what's he saying? And really, what he was telling me was that they had been in Pennsylvania, and so he was Pennsylvania Dutch. But this was a Swiss-German family that came, and after the War of 1812, they were in Ohio and kept westering until in 1872, they were in the heart of what is now Minneapolis, and sent out 2 members of the family to check into farmland in California because Thomas Bullock Kiesling was really interested in growing things and thought he could do it better. In California, he didn't like the winters in Minnesota. So he sold his 12 acres and came to California, and with him came his 12 children. And they bought land in what was then the Willows, and now is called the Willow Glen area. And so my grandmother and grandfather met at a house party in Capitola. They were married in about 1883, I think. And at that time, the families were well settled enough so that house parties in Capitola were no great novelty, evidently, because all the families seem to have had summer residences around the coast from that time on. Now, I didn't grow up on a ranch. I grew up in San Jose, but because I had farm relatives, I was on the ranch a lot. And when I was in about the 8th grade, my grandfather Kiesling divided up his property, and my mother's portion was 14 acres. And so she was a farmer, but she didn't run it herself, except she obligingly took her children out to pick the walnuts. So this was our fall activity, was picking walnuts, but then we got some of the money from them, so it made it all seem fairly worthwhile. And I remember another early experience. My brother and I peddled pears one year. She wasn't able to sell them any other way, and so we went door to door in our area in San Jose and took orders for those pears. My father's family came to California in 1904. They were true New Englanders. They came to this country in 1650 and 1635 and 1620, and as land was divided among the children, there would be no more land, and so they would move on. And so members of the Abbott family and the Edson family moved into Vermont. But even then, they were not stuck to one place, because I found, to my amazement, long after she had died, that my grandmother had been born in Wisconsin. Her father had gone to Wisconsin and had lived in several different places in Wisconsin, and then when his father had died in Vermont, moved back to the family farm there, and that is where my grandmother and grandfather Abbott were married, and then they moved down to Massachusetts. And so in 1904, my grandfather retired from dentistry and came to California, first to Watsonville and then Camel, and my father went through Camel High School and met my mother there. Then when their children were college age, they moved back to Massachusetts, put them all through college. They had 5 children, and then moved back to California and lived out on Florence Avenue, and I was born in a house next to theirs on Florence Avenue. And so I had 2 grandfathers that were ranching in Santa Clara County, although my grandfather Abbott had 2 or 4 acres. And one of my early memories is when he would borrow a horse from a neighbor and disc up the orchard, he would let us ride behind on the drag. And I thought that was great because you didn't do things like that on the Kiesling Ranch. My grandfather, Kiesling, thought children should be out of orchards. He didn't like people walking around and compacting the soil. And another memory of Florence Avenue is that one of the neighbors had a cow, and so you could go there and buy milk. And this was an early lesson to me because ranches in Santa Clara County were so specialized from early days that cows and chickens were not necessarily on every ranch. And to me, as a city child, milk came in bottles. But my father was very convinced that the good of the whole community depended on the farms, because that was where all the income came from. All the new money came from the sales of agricultural commodities. And so that he always said, don't complain about the rain because we always need rain. And we should buy locally because that benefited the whole community. It was a community thing in those days that you always knew everyone, you knew people through the whole valley, not just your own part of town, but the whole area. And so in later years, when newcomers were saying, well, to me, when I said, well, I don't really feel that I'm a resident of Sunnyvale, they said, but where do you live? And I said, well, I live in Santa Clara County. That's where my home is. It's not in one little subdivided part of it. And beyond that, it always seemed like California was home.
Thank you. That is a very beautiful expression of your experience in the county. And speaking to your last point of the sense of community and one person knew one another, Ray Benech mentioned while you were speaking that he knew your Stockman, is that right? The Stockman relatives?
The ones in Berryessa, Hobson, old man Hobson. I remember it was probably about 1948. He was taking his prune orchard out. And he must have been 90 years old at that time, and he was climbing a ladder and taking a pair of pliers and cutting the wire out. They had the trees wired together and rolling up the wire and saving it in these great big old dead prune trees.
That's a very good point. I think that speaks to the whole mentality of the farmer. You never threw anything away. If you come to our farm, you will find there an accumulation of 80 years of farming experience. Just nothing was thrown out.
The Abbott side, was one of them the principal of the grammar school at Campbell?
No.
That was another Abbott.
That's another
The
family.
Kieslings I know real well. I remember old man Kiesling, and Dave Kiesling, one of the sons, I still see him occasionally. He's up north now and near the, what's the new dam there? Oroville Dam. He's retired up there now.
Well, I think this sort of spontaneous response speaks a great deal about the sense of community that did exist among the farm families in Santa Clara County. There's another point that you made, however, which I think should be emphasized in speaking about some of your ancestors. The fact that in the East, in New England, the farmland was divided so often among the oncoming generations that if you were a younger son, there wasn't any land for you. And that was one of the reasons that prompted the expansion west. It was also the reason my grandfather left Sweden, because the family homestead there was left to the eldest son, and he was not the eldest son. So he boarded a ship and came to San Francisco seeking his fortune. But that's a very typical reason for one of the reasons for the westward movement. Next, I would like to introduce to you the man on my right, Mr. Eiichi Sakauye, who, when I first met him, told me he was a pomologist, And of course, I knew what that was right away, but most of you may not. So I will let him tell you what a pomologist is.
Thank you. I certainly enjoyed coming here. And first thing I heard those engines pop along, and that reminded me of the old days. As I looked around, I found out that my old grammar school teacher's brother-in-law is one of the exhibitors of the gas engine, Mr. Jorgensen. And as I come into the meeting room here, Larry has opened up some more avenues that I hate to spoil it, Larry, but may I say this little story? I'm serving on the Agriculture Soil Committee for a number of years, and one time I went to their convention in Lake Tahoe, and a speaker from Washington, D.C. got up and says that, you know, I have something to tell you. You know, they were parading down Washington, D.C. with these huge tractors and agriculture equipment, and now we don't need these farmers no more, one person says. We just don't need the farmers. All we got to do is go to the supermarket. We get everything we need. Now with that ice broken, I got attention. I'd like to tell you something about my father, parents. Like many persons of Japanese ancestry, my father came from a large family. He was a carpenter in Japan, and he was one of the younger ones. Like Yvonne says, usually the older son stays behind with the family, and he is the one that inherits the family home or ranch or whatever he may have. Well, my dad happened to be the younger one, and he started out one day, he says, well, I'm going to America where many of my friends are going, and see what I can do. So he arrived in Seattle in 1900, and he tried the railroading for a little while, and he says, well, this isn't it. So he hitchhiked to San Francisco, then to San Jose in the year 1900, because he had some friends here from the same prefecture in Japan. Immediately, he started farming on North First Street. He raised little truck crops and strawberries. Then finally, he decided to go in a little bigger, and he came to Trimble Road, where the Standard Oil has its tank farm present day. He was there from 1900 to 1906, and he grew nothing but strawberries. Then in 1907, he bought a 20-acre land across the Trimble Road there, and there he planted strawberries again, and he had also planted some fruit crops. In the orchard that he had purchased, there were many varieties of fruit trees. A person who had the property before had some cherries, peaches, plums, prunes, all mixed, and they were not uniform orchard. So he finally dug that up and planted into a young orchard of prunes, pears, and apricots. In between the orchard, he planted strawberries, and he expected to make a few dollars in 1915, the exposition in San Francisco. Well, that year it turned out to be a total failure, so it was very difficult for him to operate his farm. But he struggled, and in 1911, he went back to Japan and met a girl and came back, and in 1912 I came about to be on this earth. Ever since I was a little youngster, I was always taken out in the field from morning to night, and my neighbors often said I grew up in a tomato box because my dad used to grow tomatoes and used to drag the box with me in it. all over the field. That family had deceased a few years ago. Every time I meet him, here you are, a tomato box boy. Well, anyhow, my dad farmed sharecropping tomatoes, about 105 acres for a number of years. I might tell you a little further about, back up a little bit. The reason my dad bought this farm, because the fact that many of the Japanese had leased or sharecropped on various farms. They would move from one farm to the other. The reason for moving from one farm to the other is always looking for a fertile farm that they can grow berries or other crops. My dad didn't believe in that because he said that every time you move, you lose a lot of your equipment, you lose a lot of your time. So he decided to buy the property, and he bought the property in 1907. Of course, at that particular time, there was no alien land law. The alien land law came into effect in 1920, when no persons of Japanese ancestry ineligible to become American citizens could hold title to the land. So in 1924, the exclusion law came in that no person of Japanese ancestry cannot immigrate to the United States. So that's just before those, 1924, there were many picture brides that came to the United States. And he farmed on this 20 acres, and he also leased some other farms because it was very hard to make a go of a little farm, so he tried a little larger farm. And he had succeeded quite well. Of course, when I was 10 years old, that was in 1922, I had to drive a Fordson tractor. I could barely stop the old thing with my both feet. And I was put on the tractor, and he would come noontime and help me direct me the way so I can stop the thing and put it away for noon hour. But I worked hard. I went to grammar school after I shocked some hay. And then he took me to grammar school, which was on North First Street, a little one-room schoolhouse. And after school, he's waiting for me to help him again. So I was one of those boys that tagged along with my father from morning till night when I am free. So I've learned a great deal about farming, and the shortcomings of that is the fact that I wasn't able to spend too much time on my homework, so I was always behind my homework in school. But fortunately, my dad and mother believed in education, and they had told me that there's nothing like education. The only one that can take away from you is death. So education is the greatest asset of it all. So every opportunity that I had, I have used that opportunity to even go in libraries and open up a book just to read. I've attended San Jose State, and one of the speakers here's his dad is one of my school chums, and many of the speakers here, I remember the old names as I think of the old high school days, that Kiesling families and Benech families. We only had 3 high schools those days. We had the San Jose High School, the Camel High School, and the Santa Clara High School. So when we have games or something, we always bump into each other, and it was quite a melting pot of all races and all backgrounds those days. Today, we seem to be breaking away from that, and they even think about segregating, desegregation, all that. But I really enjoyed my life on the farm because there's no 2 years alike on the farm. Every year is different. One year you might hit a disaster year, another year you might hit a good year, but good years come a few and far between. And those days in the 20s, you don't work for $4 or $5 or $6 an hour. It's only $1 or $1.25 a day if you're really good. And land back in the time my dad bought the land, he paid in a neighborhood of $300 per acre. Today, you saw in the paper the other day, a short way from us, $13 a square foot. So what a difference it had made. But one thing that really intrigues me, that I think that I have lived in a period of great transition, because look at all the things that have changed from the time that I was able to observe to the present day, which makes almost 70 years, a great magnificent change in the mechanical, electrical, and the electronics field of today, which makes our life much easier than our fathers have gone through. With this short review, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Eiichi. It's very, very interesting.
Pomology, I'm very much interested in propagating various varieties of fruits, and grafting, budding is my hobby. Many persons who have backyard have one apple tree or one lemon tree or orange tree. I can have several varieties of lemon on one tree or several varieties of apple on one tree. But one disaster to that, in case a gopher gets it or if a tree decides to die, you lose them all.
I might add that Eiichi's farm is off of North 1st Street in San Jose, and it's a very magnificent piece of pear orchard. He told me that he had over 60 varieties of pears in his orchard, which is an incredible number. But as he just indicated to you, many varieties can be grafted onto the same tree, and in fact, it's a wonderful thing to see because they ripen at a different time, and you see a yellow pear and a very green pear, and all on the same from the same stalk. So that's what a pomologist is I always thought it was just a pear grower, but it's obviously more than that. I'd like to move now to Mrs. Mathilda Sousa, who's sitting at my far left, whose family name is actually Mariani. You know her better perhaps as a daughter of the Mariani family. And I know that as with all of the people here, with perhaps the exception of one, I have known their families through my family for years and years, and there's a very warm and old relationship between the Olson family and the Mariani family.
Before I get started, I'd like to say that I think that Charlie Olson and my dad and Nick Tikvika started shipping cherries as a group together. I don't remember how many years ago, but that was my first association with the Olson family, and we had a wonderful association all those years. My grandfather, John Swillich, came to America in 1889 from a small island off the coast of Yugoslavia. That was our first entrance into America. He left my grandmother with her two children, Victoria, who was later my mother, and her sister Antoinette. He came to Portland, Oregon, where he remained for 6 months fishing. Then he came and settled in the Santa Clara Valley. 4 months of each year he spent in Oregon and Washington fishing in the Columbia River District, and then he'd return to the Santa Clara Valley and work in the ranches. And he did this for 5 years and then gave up fishing and worked on the ranches for the next 4 years in various parts of the Santa Clara Valley. Finally saved enough money to lease a 20-acre farm, which was called the Daggett Place. And it had a different name then, but it is now what is now called the Fremont Road in Sunnyvale. And that was the home in which I was later born also. In 1900, Grandfather felt he could afford finally to send for his wife and 2 daughters who he had left in Yugoslavia. And after the family arrived, Grandpa insisted that Mother and Aunt Antoinette go to school so they could learn the language and help him in his business, as he had had little schooling and kept all the business figures and the hours that the workers worked in his head. The 2 sisters attended Collins School, which is on Homestead Road, which is now known as the Copa de Oro Clubhouse. In 1902, my father kept talking to his parents to let him come to America. And so they finally consented after a year to let him come. So in 1902, he came to the United States and started working in a coconut processing plant in San Francisco, and then became a cooper. He too tried fishing, but almost lost his life on a boat, so he came to St. Helena in the Napa Valley, where he was offered a job to make wine barrels and taste wine. He had never forgotten Victoria Swillich, whom he had known back in Yugoslavia. So he used to come down to visit her, and in 1907 he married Victoria, and my two sisters, Winifred and Irene, were born in St. Helena. In 1909, the fumes from the heated oak staves of the barrels produced an allergy, and he became very, very ill. He was so ill that he decided he was going to take his young family and go back to Yugoslavia. And my grandfather persuaded him to come to the Santa Clara Valley and work for him. And his health improved rapidly, and he was soon able to make a down payment on a 4-acre ranch on Laurel Avenue in Cupertino. And he built a home at that time for $200. From Grandpa, Dad learned how to estimate fruit on the trees, and in 1913, he went into the business of buying green fruit on his own. In order to be certain of his ability to estimate fruit on the trees, he once stripped an apricot tree of both the ripe and green apricots so he could check the amount of fruit on the trees, and he thus learned to estimate how much fruit was on a tree. Evidently they bought fruit green on the trees, and then they processed it and sold it, and this is the way he made his little profit. We all worked and helped with the harvesting of the fruit. We packed cherries, cut apricots, and picked prunes during the summer. We enjoyed the work because we sang and made a game of working. I can never remember feeling I was working too hard. At night, we played horseshoes and baseball, and when we had horses, we had a hay barn, and we would slide down the hay, which we weren't supposed to do. And we played hide and seek in the barns. Dad always wanted to be sure we had an education because he realized what he had missed by not continuing his education. From a youngster in grammar school, I remember we helped Dad pay the employees. All Dad had at that time was a small book in which he wrote the names and hours each man worked each day. There was no Social Security or no deductions. Just a matter of multiplying the hours by the rate and making the checks. Compared to today, with all the deductions required, all of our payroll is now done by a computer. Dad always loved the ranches, and every night during the harvest season, he would drive through the ranches, sometimes picking up one of the grandchildren for a ride to see if the fruit was ripe and which orchard should be picked the next day. Although Dad only started with 4 acres, he always bought fruit on the trees green, which would harvest, as I said, the fruit and then sell it. This way he made enough to purchase more land. He always said one could not go wrong with land. When my brother, Paul Jr., attended Davis, he learned many new methods and got many new ideas for fruit growing. Dad would always say, let's try a couple of rows of trees and see if the idea works. And if it does, next year we'll do the whole orchard. So they would experiment on a small portion of the orchard. Paul Jr. was very fond of experimenting and tried many new methods, not only in the United States, but introduced new ideas in Australia and in many foreign countries, where he explained our farming methods and helped the poverty-stricken people to plant seeds to feed themselves. He introduced methods to increase production. His goal in life was to help people to become more self-sufficient and produce nourishing food for their country and people. Several of our employees have small farms which they cultivate as well as working full-time for us, but not anymore in the Santa Clara Valley. All of our ranches have been sold here, and we now have them in Healdsburg and Marysville. Most of the prunes are now picked by machines. Where 4 pickings were required many years ago, now they found that if there's enough sugar in the prunes, 1 picking is all that is required. Peaches and pears are also cut by machine. But we still cut our apricots by hand because the halves come out better for our bags and our operation at the plant. I think the greatest frustration the farmer has is the weather, over which no one has any control, and the fact that the fruit is seasonal and new employees are always required during the rush season. I remember trying to blow the water off cherry trees by helicopter one year after a heavy rain. I think Yvonne remembers it too. And stacking prune trays in 1918 after a 5-day downpour which ruined all the prunes, but which resulted in the farmers building dehydrators in order to prevent another disaster. Our family all loved the farm and the orchards, and still do, as we are still farming. Even today, when driving through the country, whenever I see trees in full bloom or laden with fruit ready to harvest, I am still overwhelmed with their beauty and the wonders of nature. And nothing gives me more satisfaction than picking my own apricots off my own apricot tree. I still have 2 left on my place. My grandfather and my father, I think, both had their dreams realized, coming to America practically penniless and starting with leased land, then purchasing their first 4-acre ranch, adopting his new country by becoming an American citizen, and through hard and honest work, raised his family in the American way, and has been able to increase his holdings. And we are sorry we left we haven't still left the Santa Clara Valley as far as farming is concerned, but we were almost, had to do it. We had no choice. And now we are still operating farms in Healdsburg and Marysville, and have quite an operation over there now.
Thank you, Mathilda. It's very, very moving chronicle of your family's involvement here. Did I hear correctly that the Mariani plant that has been a landmark next to Highway 280 will no longer be with us?
Well, they have received zoning for the place for condominiums, and I think that it will not be here too long. I don't know how long, it just depends. But you don't develop a piece of property overnight, but they have received their zoning too.
This question will come up in the discussion, but as long as we have a fly here that wants to be educated, and it doesn't leaping from one speaker to the next. As long as we're on the question, where was the decision to move out of the Santa Clara Valley directly related to the urbanization around you?
That's right.
Economics.
Economics. There was no, the taxes had gone so high. Water wasn't that easy to obtain, and the whole economic situation.
And if I may, wouldn't the relocation of the processing plant be the same thing? The land that it sits on is so valuable that you could probably replace the land, build a brand new plant and have some money left, and where maybe the plant is somewhat obsolete today, you can put it in a new location, be more efficient, serve the public with the fruit that you process somewhat more competitively, and things go on.
Plus the fact that the plant would be placed in a strategic place where it would be closer to the fruit.
Yeah.
So that it wouldn't have to be, now all the fruit has to be brought in here. There isn't that much of prunes and apricots left in this valley, and it still has to be carted in.
That's right.
I mean, it has to be brought in, so wherever it is taken, where the plant would be changed would be closer to our operation.
This is one of the points to be made in the course of our discussion, why the farms have slowly but surely moved out of our Santa Clara Valley into other areas. But before we get into a general discussion, I want to reach our last 2 speakers, and I'm going to introduce Steve Oku next, who represents, is the only one on our panel, who represents the flower growing industry in Santa Clara County. Today, the largest crop in the county in terms of dollar return is fresh flowers. And Steve, could you tell us something about your experience and your family's experience?
Sure, thank you. Flowers and foliage plants in dollar value ranks above lettuce, eggs, wheat, tomatoes, chickens, and oranges in California. In Santa Clara County, it is the leading agricultural product with a farm value of $29 million. In San Mateo County, it is also the leading crop representing 80% of the total agricultural production of that county, a value of $93 million. Flowers and foliage plants statewide is a $400 million industry made up mostly of small family farm operations like ours. Since the majority of the flowers and plant growers in Santa Clara County are of Japanese descent, I think a brief history of our family might be helpful in getting a feeling for the industry. My grandfather arrived in California, I believe in 1885, and he worked as a migrant farm laborer for the first few years until he got a job working for a Japanese flower grower located near Oakland. It was there that he learned the art of growing flowers and decided to risk his life savings by starting his own business in Mountain View in 1902. He built 2 small greenhouses and was growing a variety of flowers to fill the local florist needs. The business grew slowly at first until my father took control of the business and began selling flowers in San Francisco by boarding the pre-dawn trains and taking his baskets of flowers to the San Francisco or to the city and selling them on the sidewalks. A few years later, he and a few other growers founded the California Flower Market in San Francisco, which acts as a central wholesale distribution point for the area florists. The business expanded, and the years of hard work were beginning to bear fruit until the outbreak of World War II and the relocation of all the Japanese on the West Coast. Along with 110,000 other Japanese, my family was forced to settle their affairs in less than 5 days. Luckily, my father chose to lease his greenhouses to a trusted employee with the understanding that he could keep all the income as long as he kept the nursery in good repair. Other growers chose to sell out at whatever price they could get under such hysterical conditions. After the war, my family returned to put back the pieces of their life. My father and his brother began once again to build their business. The air age brought expanded markets, and by the 1960s, Santa Clara County led the United States in the dollar value of cut flowers produced. Today, our nurseries are located in Pescadero and in Mountain View. Mountain View is still the original site. We grow roses and carnations and a few iris, and we sell them throughout the United States and Canada. We are still very much a family operation with my brother, cousin, and myself running the business today. The future is threatened with foreign competition coming mainly from Colombia, where they now produce half of the carnations sold throughout the United States. With their cheap labor and ideal growing conditions, the Colombians are cutting prices and are forcing many growers out of business. Today, all growers are faced with many challenges. But it must be recognized that farming is a business and payrolls must be met and taxes paid. When I attended business school, they said that there are 4 major inputs necessary for free enterprise. These inputs are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. It is my concern that people in their zeal to preserve open space are only concerned with the land. We all know that open space and scenic panoramas are important. However, when land use restrictions to protect open space become so tight that they will obstruct the operations of the farms to a dangerous level. This is already the case in the agricultural areas of San Mateo County, where we have open space at the expense of agriculture. To my fellow farmers, I would warn, agriculture is the friend of open space. However, the reverse is not true. To ensure open space requires that volumes of regulations, restrictions, and permit procedures and fees be administered. Delays caused by such permits for things like barns, farm labor housing, pump houses, and greenhouses have made farming almost impossible. When planting deadlines pass, it's too late. I've spoken of the inputs of free enterprise: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. All are necessary for any business to function. How land use restrictions affect the necessary inputs are of paramount importance when the survival of agriculture is at stake. When housing restrictions in rural areas become too oppressive, farm labor families are displaced because since people cannot get permits to build new homes, they buy the older homes once used by farm labor and renovate them. This process is now taking place, and farmers are having difficulty harvesting their crops for lack of the necessary labor input. Land use restrictions also affect the collateral value of the farmer's property. This will hinder his ability to obtain capital or the funds to operate, the third necessary input. And lastly, the fourth input, entrepreneurship, which is management, the sons and the daughters. Where are they going to live, assuming they want to continue farming? The same restrictions placed on urban folk from building on agricultural lands also affects the sons and the daughters of legitimate farmers. And are they willing to face the frustrations in dealing with government restrictions? It takes a special type of person to work long hours for a paycheck months away, and that's if everything goes right. A person with spirit. I only hope the spirit is not broken by insane land use regulations designed to preserve agriculture and open space with the same type mentality that one employs when preserving dinosaur eggs in formaldehyde. Agriculture does not preserve well using that type of solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I think that what we have touched upon here is the heart of the political issue of farmland. I was speaking to a couple of farmers last weekend, in San Luis Obispo, where our children are currently enrolled, beginning as freshmen at Cal Poly, renowned for its farming education. And the farm wife said to me, she said, farming is a political issue. And I thought about that, and she's absolutely right. And here, that side of it, we have sitting in our audience Larry Orman, who represents the People for Open Space, and later we'll approach this problem of the rights of the farm, the individual to pursue farming in a given area, and the rights of the community to look toward the question of open space greenbelt areas. But before we do that, I want to introduce the speaker immediately to my left, who is one of my favorite persons, who has a beautiful farm in the heart of the Almaden Valley, part of Santa Clara County, and without taking any of his time, I'm introduce Ray Benech.
Thank you. I'm all dewy-eyed with all the nostalgia around here. Steve's uncle, Leonard, who passed away a couple of years ago, was a good friend of mine, and I just want to bring up another vignette. The way there months ago, and then when they went to get their room, they said, well, now you go 4 miles down the road to the Ricky Ticky Inn, and that's where you're staying tonight. And I had just come in and registered and got my VIP room because I'm somebody all puffed up and important, so I got a room there. And in fact, I'll have to back up a little bit. I rode up with Leonard and a couple other fellow who I can't remember who it is now, but we shared a car coming. I think Dave Vanny was one of them. He was just a kid at the time. But anyway, Leonard was mad. And he says, that's discrimination. Just because I'm a Japanese, they're going to make me go $4. That wasn't the real reason. It was that because I think I was a Farm Bureau president or something at the time. They, you know how politics are. Anyway, I said, Leonard, no problem. They gave me this nice room here. It's twin-bedded. You come and sleep with me. Just take your reservation and tear it up and throw out the guy. Just come in my room. Won't even tell him about it. The hell with it. Just come and move in. He says, but Ray, I snore. I said, I won't guarantee what I'm going to do. Let's take a chance on it. And I think that one little incident, I made a lifelong friend. And anyway, my family on both sides, both came from my father's side from France and my mother's side from Italy. They both came here in the 1880s, 1890s. They were both from farming backgrounds there. They came as farm laborers, then sharecroppers, and finally farm owners. And without going into all the details, because time is getting short, I think you've heard enough of that. I Myself, I started farming with my father. Of course, I was raised and worked on the farm all my life, but when I got out of the Army in 1947, I started a joint venture with my father, leasing property in Santa Clara County and farming it, and purchased my own farm up in Almaden in '55, and I've been there ever since. So I'm a full-time farmer. I make a living at it, and I'm still making a living at it, but I'm a realist. I think that Larry here gave a beautiful presentation, but it just has to be one-sided. And all this nostalgia is nice, but I think that to survive in this world, we have to be realists, and we have to look at things objectively. One thing that I know is agriculture is transitory, just like anything else in life. You heard the people's presentations. Most of the people were farming in one area, moved to another area. Farms move, people move, agriculture moves, water moves, things change. And things have changed in Santa Clara County. I've never sold a piece of land for subdivision. I've never made a dime in my life on the increase in value of land. And as you're talking about, my father bought a place in Campbell in 1921. He paid $1,800 an acre. It must have been pretty high right after World War I guess. He paid $1,800 an acre for it. He sold half of it in 1945. Not Tick Vicka, but well, anyway, it doesn't make any difference. One of the slab developers who started around Sunnyvale there, I'm trying to think of the name. It doesn't make any difference. But anyway, he sold half the farm in 1945. I'd just gotten out of the Army. I said, what the hell are you doing? And he said, well, he sold it for $900 an acre. It was exactly half of what he paid for it in 1921. So this everybody getting rich on subdivision wasn't entirely true in every case. And fortunately, he kept half of it. And sold that in '63 for $3,000 an acre, and thought maybe he could retire on the money that he got out of that. Kept 1 half-acre lot to build a house on, which he never did. He bought a house in Los Gatos. That half-acre lot sat there for a number of years, and I told him, that's kind of a key lot. I think we can get a service station on that, Dad. I said, oh, that's too much bother. I said, well, I'll buy it off you. So no, you can't afford it. So anyway, he put it on the market for $20,000, and somebody picked it up and built a service station on it. I don't know what it's worth today, but it's worth, a good deal more. So everybody didn't get rich speculating. The other comment I'd like to make, we heard about all this loss of farmland in Santa Clara County and in California and in the United States. And I don't want to dispute the figures. I'm sure somebody researched them. And in fact, I did get a copy of your book. It's well done. It's beautiful, glossy pages and nice photography and everything else. I agree with a lot of the statements. Yeah, the zinger's coming. I agree with a lot of the comments, but I don't necessarily agree with all the conclusions. There's something a little more precious than land in California. It's water. And I don't think there's a farm here that didn't use water. Am I correct? And there's a shortage of water. There's no shortage of land. In fact, I think it was 1950, and these numbers can be a little off because I've been jotting them down. I didn't come prepared with any speech. There was something like 6 million acres of irrigated land in 1950. In 1970, there's 8 million acres of irrigated land in the state of California. And the projection is by the year 2000, provided they build the peripheral canal, which Farm Bureau is against, but I am in favor of because I don't have to agree with everything organizations, But anyway, the projection is by the year 2000 to have 11 million acres irrigated in the state of California. If you just take those numbers alone, it doesn't look like the land is disappearing for agriculture. In fact, according to one of these government studies that I took the figure out, there's some 32 million acres in the state of California of irrigatable land. So there seems to be a big inventory of land. All we need is the water. And in the state, we have enough water if we build some more dams that a lot of other people don't want to build, and we transport the water. Ever since civilization began in the Middle East, the first thing they did was dam up the Tigris River and start irrigating a little land so they didn't have to be camel jockeys for the rest of their life. And that's how civilization began. So if you're worried about agriculture, worry about water, worry about the transportation of water, worry about what this gentleman talked about, government regulations, worry about cooperating with farmers. Take this medfly thing, for instance, a year ago. Where in the hell were all the city councilmen in the whole Santa Clara County and the Board of Supervisors? I appeared before the Board of Supervisors. I told them, hey, this is a serious thing. We ought to cooperate and get behind it. At that time, they probably could have sprayed about 8 or 10 square miles in the heart of Santa Clara and eliminated the whole thing for a few $100,000. I was at a meeting Thursday morning. Senator O'Keefe was there and said that the cost of combating the medfly now has passed $100 million. We could have built the peripheral canal probably for what they're going to spend before they eradicate this thing, just because the local residents didn't want to get sprayed on, and they're getting sprayed on anyway. And is that cooperation? It doesn't sound like it to me. Pears. Got all dewy-eyed about your pears. I have a pear orchard, or I should say I had a pear orchard. I pushed it out last week. And I planted that, every single tree myself, dug the holes. I actually didn't dig the holes. I set the trees. I had a couple fellows digging the holes, but yeah, every one of those trees. And I saw them grow. I took crops off of them. The last 3 years in a row, I lost money on them. Out. If I don't do that, I won't be here. And if I'm not here, all the land in Santa Clara County can be here. You're only going to have weeds on it. It takes an entrepreneur. It takes somebody who makes a profit. It takes somebody with the guts and the fortitude to farm the land. The land doesn't farm itself. There's land all over. My wife isn't here today. I wish she would have been because she's a better speaker than I am. But incidentally, she is an airplane pilot, and she was in an air race yesterday from San Diego to Provo, Utah. There's 30 planes in the race, and they put the pedal to the metal, and away they went. And I got a phone call last night. She got there all right. So I don't know whether she won or lost. There's a lot of numbers that go into that. But she's not too good at navigating, and she had her chart spread all over the living room floor for the last week, plotting her course. And I look over that map there, and I've flown with her, and I said, gee, looks like you're going to go over 100 million square miles of kitty litter. There's just an awful lot of open land in this United States that has never been developed, and most of that in that particular flight is what we call desert, but a lot of that desert land, if you had to pull a figure out, maybe 40 or 50% of it is good farmable land if it had water. We worry about open space. If you fly, let's take California, and let's forget about Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Idaho, Montana, and all these places where they got open space running out their ears. But even in the state of California, if you get in a plane and fly from the northernmost portion clear down to San Diego in a plane, you can make 6 or 7 runs, which I've done. I like to go up and take a look once in a while after a wet year and see how full all the lakes and rivers are and the dams and things like that. You get a pretty good idea what's going on. There's an awful lot of open space. There's all the land that we lost in Santa Clara County. They talk about 100,000 acres, probably more like 200,000 acres of good farmable land on the floor of the valley at one time. If you go on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley, below Fireball and down that way, there's 5 Santa Clara counties all in a row of nice flat land where you can drive your tractor a mile in one direction before you have to turn, and you can grow any crop that was grown here cheaper and more effectively, and all they need is water, and they do have water down there, but they're short of it. So we talked about thousands of acres. Naragi Farms in Turlock, one farmer, happens to be an Iranian. I don't want to comment on that one way or the other, but he's got 13,000 acres of almonds. 13,000 acres. He owns his own plane to spray it. You know, it's such a big block. So things can be done. He can produce almonds a hell of a lot cheaper than anybody here can on 5 or 1 or 2 acres. And when you go to the grocery store and buy them, and these are 98 cents and these are $2.54, and you look at them and the 98-cent ones are bigger and nicer and better sorted, which ones are you going to buy? You're going to buy the $2.48 one because this poor guy has to make a living? That's not the way you purchase things. So farming is a business. It was a good business in Santa Clara County. I would have been personally better off if none of the people moved here who moved here since the late 30s or 40s. But it's happened. And I think these decisions were made a long time. I think in the late 30s and the early 40s, the leaders of the community, which I was not one at that time, got together and they decided that urbanization was going to be the future of this area. They planned sewer plants, highways, and many of the facilities that you people are using today. If they didn't plan them 40 years ago, they wouldn't be here today. My first recollection of planning things was in the early 50s. I think it was 1952. We were arguing about water. And there was 2 ways of getting water into Santa Clara County at that time. One was the South Bay Aqueduct, and another one was the Pacheco Tunnel, which they are still drilling today. This is 1952. We were having a water meeting and a big fight about which one to go. Then J. Winter Smith, who was a Mormon that came to the guy Smith who started the Mormon church, he was a son of him. He was a water expert. He got up, and he was in his 80s or 90s in those days, and he got up and said, hey, what's the matter with having both of them? He says, I've been out of water many times, but he says, it's kind of nice to have a little bit more than you need once in a while. And so it was decided that we would go for both sources of water. I think it was in 65 by the time the water came in the South Bay Aqueduct. Right now in Santa Clara County, we import 1/3 of the water, and 2/3 of the water is local. And in the year 2000 or around that area, we'll be importing 2/3 of our water, and 1/3 of the water would be local water. And if it wasn't for these plans made back 30 years ago, things wouldn't be happening today. Whether the decision is right or wrong, it was made by the people who were in charge at that time, and it's very, very costly to build a freeway and stop, because then you decide it wasn't the right place for it. It might not be exactly the right place, but my personal opinion is the freeways you see here today and the few that'll be finished 1,000 years from now, those roads are going to be used. They might not be used by cars, but those corridors will be used like the great Roman roads that were put out through Europe. And people are criticizing it. Well, they're going over a creek, or they're doing this, or they're doing that. Hey, it's a bunch of BS. Now, another thing, 50,000 acres of land to preserve in South County. I would humbly suggest that there is 500,000 homes in northern Santa Clara County that if you took up the backyards and the lawns, would probably make another 50,000 acres of just as fertile land, if not more fertile land, than the land that's left there. And I would humbly suggest that in the legislation that some of these people want, they want to control the land over there and tell people what to grow, how to grow it, and where to do it. Maybe we should have an ordinance in Santa Clara County that would require these people to take their lawns out and grow a certain variety of tomatoes or whatever grows best there. And they could, if they were worried about the production of food, I'm sure that we could double the production in Santa Clara County, and we could tell these people, no, you can't have this, you plant that because it grows best in this area, and we'll have Mr. Sakauye go out and graft the trees for them. But
sorry, we have midfly in this area. You can't.
Oh. And I've got a 12 o'clock appointment, so I think I've talked long enough. But I'd be happy to answer any questions if that's what we're going to do right now.
In fact, I would like to open the discussion now to those of you in the audience and to any members of the panel who would like to question any other member of the panel. I think you can see from our last 2 speakers that there is a definite viewpoint that is shared by these 2 farmers, which is in counter position to the one expressed by Larry Orman. And I'd like, in fact, Larry, maybe you'd like to answer.
Let me just think about a two-sentence response. I guess the first sentence is that everybody's talked about how everybody moved west and filled up the vacuum of the frontier. There's a danger in the kind of nostalgia that Ray is bringing forward that we have the resources to do the kind of development that we did in the 50s and 60s and keep on going throughout the 1890s and in the year 2000.
I don't think that'll happen.
We don't. We don't have the resources to build the kind of water facilities at the kind of prices we can pay for that would irrigate the large amount of potential land. And there's only about 3 million acres that we can irrigate anymore in California beyond the 9.5 we have now. So it isn't the question of whether the number is exact. It isn't a question of whether, and nobody in that slide certainly didn't see a line being drawn. The question is, when are we going to decide what we have to deal with? Because agriculture, yes, is transitory, but there are not many frontiers left for agriculture in this nation. That's the other kind of nostalgia that's very difficult to also overcome. I agree. Be a realist. Don't be too overwhelmed by the fact that the past is wonderful in many ways, but boy, there's a danger in not worrying about the future in terms of limits there too.
Well, I just don't agree. He says water's too expensive to develop. I just don't agree with it. There's 2 canals running down the length of the San Joaquin Valley that were put in the last 30 years that I would suggest that 1,000 years from now, those are going to be like the Great Wall of China. The people will come and see what's been done. We could put a canal from the Great Lakes to Phoenix, Arizona if we wanted to. It's just a matter of putting our resources there instead of doing environmental impact reports and all the paperwork that the government wants. This nation is strong, and it can be 10 times stronger if we just get down to business. I'm also a planning commissioner, as some of you might know. Been 10 or 11 years on the Santa Clara County Planning Commission. I am a student of land use, and I think that land use should be controlled. I think that land use should have some orderly procession to it. But it's a long-range thing. You can't get down to little specific little squares. It's a broad brush type of approach. It also is that commitments are made 30 and 40 and 50 years in advance of the fruitation of something. I remember this place here. I delivered spray material here in 1948. It was an apricot orchard. There was a little old winery over there. I had to stack the bluestone, in the winery and the lime and things like that. I think it was Euphrats or somebody like that owned it. And those people were millionaires. They didn't make it off the apricots. And if you would listen to a lot of people in 1890, this land was subdivided into fruit orchards, and people from the east came out here, especially ones that had ill health, because it was a healthy place to live. So it was a subdivision in that area. And I humbly submit that, before that, you had the Spaniards here with their vast ranchos, and before that, you had a few Indians around here eating acorns. And if we were meeting 150 years ago, we'd probably be crying because the poor Indians got kicked out and the Spaniards put deer in there where their acorn trees were, oak trees. And then we kicked the Spaniards out and planted fruit trees, and now all of a sudden you people as homeowners kicked us out and planted houses. Hey, big deal. So what? That's the way life is.
It's
Yes.
a difference of viewpoint.
Yes.
I'm interested in your experiences as far as how local produce is sold. And my question comes because my experience is that some of the local outlets maybe don't take advantage of some of the local produce. So I was interested in the sign that's on the D. Martini outlet on San Antonio Road that says, "Don't worry about our food, none of it's local." And
That's government regulations again.
And I also stopped at the fruit stands along Monterey Highway in South County 3 times, and the fruit there is the worst fruit I've ever seen. And I can't understand why better local fruit is used. It must not be local, or at least some of it isn't. Bananas are totally brown. The onions are
There's no local bananas, that's for sure.
So why are they selling that kind of fruit? And why is De Martini not selling?
Is there anybody in particular who'd like to answer that question?
Just a little point on that. Through the years, as I said, we sold what we thought was the best fruit available in this valley. But the market for our fruit was not here. It was elsewhere. It was down in Los Angeles, or to the east, and elsewhere. And so the very best fruit went out of this valley, and some of the other stayed. And at that time, it ended up in roadside fruit stands.
It's a historical.
In other words, you got the residue. The people here got the residue of our quality food, which isn't right, I don't think, but that's the way economics work.
I'd like to further comment on that. I'm a cherry grower, packer, shipper, and year before last, almost my total crop went to Hong Kong. Air freighted every night there. And I got about $1 a pound. I think I got $16. That was $18, but you got about $1.50 in the box. Anyway, that was before any commission, or without a commission. That's net to me. And the fruit was picked up at the pre-cooling plant and delivered to the airport, and all those costs were picked up by the buyer. And I made money. Now, if I would have taken the best cherries and sold them in my fruit stand, which I do sell cherries in, what am I going to do with the ones that were a little overripe, the ones that are still good to eat but kind of questionable? The guy in Hong Kong doesn't want those because it would cost too much money to get a second grain item that far. It would also, they may tend to deteriorate. So you got to ship the very, very best. The further it goes, the better it has to be. I'm very, very, I hate to even mention it with the Mariani family sitting here, but I do pack and ship a little bit of dried fruit. And the very best apricots I have are going to Germany and Denmark, because the people will pay for them. They don't want the culls over there. Incidentally, at my fruit stand, I sell the best anyway.
There's another point on that. The fruit that is sold at some fruit stands, which I say is a residue, pardon me, there are agreements between, marketing agreements. Your fruit has to be a certain, excuse me.
Shortage of water.
Your fruit has to be a certain size. We shipped Santa Rosa plums. When you size, you finish.
Well, I'll let him finish a little later, but when I was first married to my husband, the only place that anywhere around to buy groceries was Cupertino's store, Cupertino Crossroads. There was a store there and the hardware next to it and not much else. And Mr. Trogdon, who operated the store, said to me, you know, I have people coming in here asking why they can't get fruit here. And he never carried fruit in the store because all his customers had fruit. And I think that that is maybe one reason why when you go to a stand you find fruit from lots of other places. We've never grown bananas here. And some of the other things certainly not too. During the 30s and 40s, my uncle grew fruit specifically for his fruit stand, and he was able to keep it supplied. But most of those stands, as you found, are not really operated by farmers.
No, that's a point to be made. They're not fruit stands that are connected to working farms, as is in the case with our farm, our fruit stand in Ray's. And as Audrey was saying, they're independent businesses that are set up, and they go to the market. From Gilroy, where would you buy fruit? In San Francisco or down south somewhere?
There's only two places to get produce. One is the wholesale market where the grocery stores also get it. Of course, the chains buy it direct by the truckload, but the small mom and papa stores buy it at the produce market. There's one in San Jose, one in Oakland, one in San Francisco.
Two in San Francisco.
Yeah. All right. Most of the fruit stands, especially where you get the poor quality stuff, they actually send a truck over to the other valley and they go to the packing sheds where they're packing melons, and they get the number 2s by the truckload. So one entrepreneur will get a whole truckload of it, and he'll hit 10 different fruit stands, and they're selling these things for maybe 1/4 of the price that you pay for a good one in the grocery store, but they're not the same quality. And They use them for lost leaders, a penny apiece for bell peppers. Well, those are the culls that come out into a bin. Now, you can pick through that stuff and get some good edible materials out of it. It's probably healthy, out of shape, out of form, a little wilted, but I'm not a scientist, but I imagine it's edible. And, you know, I personally would rather have something of high quality. I can afford something of high quality. It's an economic thing, and the fruit stands in Santa Clara County are very badly hurt this year because of the medfly and the quarantine. And a lot of them are folding up because of the confusion about where you can transport the fruit and where you cannot transport the fruit. A lot of people buy dried fruit off of me in little 4-pound bags or smaller. And they say, well, can I get through the quarantine zone with this? Can I'm going to fly to New York tomorrow. Can I bring this bag of fruit along? I say, yes, it's dried fruit. It's not a quarantine item. But I have heard of an incident on one of these roadblocks where they confiscated a bunch of dried fruit from a car. It's just the fact that the kid out there, they hired him. He was a CETA worker last year. They cut that program out. Now he's a agricultural inspector, and he don't know nothing anyway, and it's fruit to him, and he confiscates it. And if in this particular case that I heard of, the people say, well, wait a minute now, you take me to your boss because this isn't right. And they said, well, here, we haven't got time to fool with you. We're taking the fruit. Here's a phone number. You call it. The people spend 2 days trying to get to that number, but it's always busy or something like that, and the whole thing is done. I support the quarantine and this type of thing. I support anything that would eradicate this fly. But as it's unfortunate government has to do it because they're totally inept, and it makes it hard on everybody. I think the roadblocks are going to be shut down, though.
I think, excuse me, I think a lot of the fruit stands do not raise the fruit that they're selling. And it's all bought on the outside. And as he said, it's seconds, and that's why you get poor quality.
Right. Are there any more quick questions? We have run over our time.
I've got to go.
And Ray has to go.
Madam Chairman,
yes.
I have one question. Ray, you should have mentioned the climatic condition we have in Santa Clara Valley. That's why everybody's coming to Santa Clara
It's
Valley.
a nice place to live.
That's why
Right.
we came.
Now,
And in Santa Clara Valley, you can raise all types of fruits and vegetables that is in your seed and fruit catalog. While you go in the other area, you can raise some of the varieties, but you can't raise them all.
but if you take the whole Central Valley, you can get them all.
No, you can't.
Well, I won't argue that, but basically all the commercially grown crops are grown in the Central Valley, whether it's cherries, pears, peaches, nectarines, whatever it is, and that's where the volume comes from. If somebody wants to save agriculture, I'd say shut down Fresno. They're using up a lot of good land around Fresno there. Maybe you ought to let the people live within 50 miles of the coast and write it off as agriculture. I'm going to go.
Thank you. I also want to take the opportunity to thank our guests. I think that my own, even though I was brought up here and raised with this experience, I have learned an enormous amount from listening to each of them. And I want to thank them with a round of applause. As far as the rest of the activities for the day, we're going to break for lunch. And the next really organized activity after lunch will be our trip to the Piketty farm. And I have maps here for those of you who are going to participate in that part of the afternoon. And we will meet at the Pikettys hopefully by 2:30. So if you could leave here by about 2, it doesn't take that long to get up there. It's just a couple of miles from here. And I will speak to you later about that. For those who are interested, I will be in the gallery after 1 o'clock to answer any questions on the exhibit. In fact, if you are interested, I can give you a short mini tour of the exhibition that is there called Passing Farms, Enduring Values. Thank you very much.
Thank you.